En riktig god onsdag og velkommen til Økonominyhetene her hos oss i Finansavisen. Mitt navn Marius Lorentzen her på Smestadammen i Oslo på denne 12. juni. En børser pluss, en hurtigrutesjef som trer tilbake og et Orkla som selger unna kjente og kjære Lilleborg. Ja, det nok å ta tak i dag. På gjestefronten får jeg si, vi skal rett inn i EUs betente handelskrig som ser ut til å brygge opp med Kina. EU varsler nemlig nye tollsatser på kinesiske elbiler, og dette ombygging av verdikjeder etter pandemien, Ukraina-krigen og en handelskrig. Og om alt dette driver opp inflasjonen, ja, det noe vi skal diskutere med dagens gjest, partner i Bain-topp, Ernan Sainz fra konsulentgigantens kontor i Dallas. Han på besøk i Norge i dag og har møtt topper i norsk næringsliv, og han deler noen av sine råd og refleksjoner med oss her i studio straks. Men før det så må vi ta unna en god bunke nyheter som har kommet gjennom dagen. Vi startet jo selvfølgelig da med å vente på inflasjonstallene som slippes i dette sekund fra USA, og ikke minst kveldens rentebeslutning fra Federal Reserve i Washington. I tillegg så har hydrogenselskapet Nell sjøsatt datterselskapet Cavendish, som inneholder fyllestasjonene deres, da som et eget børsnotert selskap. Den børsnoteringen har ikke sett ut til å gå så bra så langt. Nell opp rundt 0,6% i dag, men Cavendish, som man altså ikke har hentet noe penger på, men bare delt ut aksjene til Nell-aksjonærene, de ned godt over 20% i dag, 22,5 for å være helt nøyaktig nå, med et volum da på rett under 10 millioner kroner foreløpig. Stolt-Nielsen, kjemikalietankrederiet, har hatt kapitalmarkedsdag i dag. Den aksjen opp litt over 3%. Det betyr at den så langt i år opp godt over 50%, og 60% hvis man regner med utbytte. Selskapet planlegger vekstinvesteringer på mellom 600 og 700 millioner dollar da fra i år til 2026. Og de jekker også, får vi ta med, guidingen opp da for andre kvartal med en time charter equivalent inntjening, da som de regner med nå skal øke ikke med 6-8%, som de tidligere har sagt, men 8-10%, da fra første til andre kvartal. Så nevnte jeg Hurtigruten, der vår egen sjefredaktør Trygve Egnar jo en av aksjonærene, får jeg nevne. Der annonserer altså konsernsjef Daniel Skjeldam at han går over en rolle som styremedlem, nå som Gebhard Reiner ansatt som sjef i HX, dette ekspedisjonscruise-rederiet, som skilt ut da fra den norske delen av Hurtigruten som Hedda Felin leder, og det var da tilbake i 2021 at man begynte dette arbeidet med å skille de to ut som to separate enheter. Reiner har tidligere bakgrunn som konsernsjef da i Sandals Resorts, blant annet, så får vi jo se hva som skjer rundt Daniel Skjeldam, om han dukker opp et annet sted etter hvert. Og så det da Orklas salg av Lilleborg, den amerikanske kjemikalieprodusenten Solenis, som kjøper Lilleborg med en verdsettelse på 600 millioner kroner på kontant og gjeldfri basis. Orkla-gevinst estimert til 475 millioner. Lilleborg omsatt i fjor for nesten 600 millioner, og de to partene kjenner hverandre for så vidt fra før, fordi Lilleborg har distribuert produkter for amerikanerne i Norge da siden 2004. Verdt å merke seg at selv om vi da snakker om at Lilleborg solgt, som jo mange assosierer med merkenavn som Blenda, Lano, Solidox, Salo, If og Omo, så disse kjente forbrukermerkevarene da en del av Orkla Home and Personal Care, og ikke den industrielle virksomheten som nå selges. Dagens konsernsjef i Orkla, Nils Selte, startet jo i jobben i april 2022 og lovet ganske kjapt da at Orkla skulle bli mer som et porteføljeselskap som kjøpte og solgte enheter for å skape mer verdier for aksjonærene. En kjapp titt på børsen får vi også ta. Hovedindeksen opp rundt 0,5% nå i ettermiddag, etter en litt blandet utvikling på Wall Street i går, der Jones var noe ned, mens Nasdaq og S&P 500 steg litt pent og forsiktig oppover, får vi si, litt blant i Asia i morgentimene. Stort sett grønt rundt oss på hele det europeiske kontinentet med en oljepris brent altså på rundt 82,90 nå, opp nesten prosenten. Futuresene på Wall Street peker svagt opp, og så får jeg jo si at vi da skal få disse inflasjonstallene straks, men før den tid så skal vi til næringspolitikken for 1375 milliarder. Ja, det var verdien ved inngangen av året på statens direkte eierskap i norsk næringsliv. Det kom frem da næringsminister Cecilie Myrseth la frem eierrapporten for 2023 i dag, og selv om dette tallet noe ned fra de 1450 milliardene man satt på for ett år siden, så nivåene fortsatt på historisk høye, da nivåer takket være børsoppgangen vi har sett. Avkastningen til staten endte på 6,8% i fjor. Børsen generelt steg jo nesten 10%, så staten ligger jo litt bak. Kollega Anders Hortvedt tok en prat med den relativt ferske næringsministeren litt tidligere i dag, og begynte å spørre om det ikke hadde vært en fordel om flere av disse aksjene som staten sitter på var i sirkulasjon hos private aksjonærer. Bare hør her.
Jeg veldig stolt av det statlige eierskapet. Det bidrar til store verdier til fellesskapet vårt, og vi skal være en god, langsiktig eier for disse selskapene, som gjør at man også tjener maksimalt ut ifra også bærekraftige rammer. Så jeg veldig stolt av det norske eierskapet, og det skal vi fortsette med.
Det blir ikke noe privatisering med deg?
Altså, jeg har tenkt å fortsette å styre det statlige eierskapet på en trygg og god måte, som igjen bidrar til viktige verdier, som igjen som sikrer både velferd og andre viktige tjenester for befolkningen i Norge.
Men hvorfor skal staten eie og drive skipsverft, og aluminiumsfabrikk, og kunstgjødselfabrikk, og rakettmotorfabrikk, og alt dette her?
Dette noen av de aller viktigste selskapene i Norge, som også har stor nytte for oss. Og det at vi skal være med som en aktiv part, som stat, det ser jeg på som en stor verdi, og det viktig å forvalte det klokt.
Privat norsk eierskap jo ikke en del av denne meldingen. Hva gjør regjeringen for å styrke det private eierskapet?
Snakker du om næringspolitikken nå i stort?
Ja.
Nei, altså det å ha en aktiv næringspolitikk kjempeviktig for regjeringen, og det følger vi opp på veldig mange måter, enten det gjennom industripolitikk, eller det gjennom reiselivspolitikk, eller det gjennom politikk for dagligvarebransjen, eller nå også at vi har en forutsigbar og god statlig eierskapspolitikk, så det gjør vi jo på mange områder.
Ser du at det kunne ha skapt en ny dynamikk på Oslo Børs hvis de statlige aksjene i for eksempel DNB, Hydro og Equinor var i privat eie?
Jeg kjempestolt av det statlige eierskapet vi har i noen av de aller viktigste selskapene i Norge, som skaper over 330 000 arbeidsplasser i Norge, og det skal vi forvalte på en klok og trygg måte fremover.
Og da skal vi gå rett til inflasjonstallene vi har fått fra USA, fordi rentenivået begynner å falle ganske kraftig nå, ned 0,12 på den amerikanske 10-åringen. Vi ser altså at dollaren svekker seg, fordi inflasjonstallene altså var en god del, får vi si, bedre enn ventet, lavere enn ventet får vi også si. Konsumprisindeksen i april steg altså 3,3% på årsbasis, var ventet 3,4 på samme nivå som i april. På månedsbasis endte vi på 0 faktisk, var ventet en liten oppgang på 0,2. Ser vi på kjernen som i USA da ikke inkluderer mat og energi, så tikket vi oppover der 0,2, var ventet 0,3 på årsbasis 3,4, det også lenger ned enn ventet. Vi var jo på 3,6 i april, var ventet ned til 3,5 i mai, endte altså på 3,4. Får vi også minne om da rekorden var i juni 2022, 9,1 lå årsveksten i inflasjonen i USA på den gangen. I Norge har vi jo nå sett at konsumprisindeksen har falt ned til 3 blank, mye takket være et fall i strømprisene nå utover våren, kjerneinflasjonen fortsatt da på 4,1 her i landet, men det ser i hvert fall ut at Wall Street tar nyhetene, i hvert fall se hvordan aksjemarkedet åpner etter hvert, men rentemarkedet responderer i hvert fall ganske momentant med å sende rentenivåene nedover, og som jeg nevnte også, dollaren strykker seg. Vi har nå en dollarkurs på 10,54, det ned 15 øre bare i løpet av dagen i dag. Før vi kjører videre, så vil jeg bare minne om at hvis ikke du rekker å se denne sendingen, så kan du også høre den og søke opp økonominyhetene i Spotify, Apple Podcast, eller ved å gå inn på FA.no/podcast. Da skal vi til dagens gjest. EU annonserte i dag det som jo kanskje ikke burde være en overraskelse, gitt signalene vi har sett fra Brussel og kontinentet tidligere, nemlig at det skal strammes inn på elbil-tollsatsene. Foreløpig ser det ut til at aktører som Geely og BYD og andre får litt forskjellige satser, men vi skal i hvert fall snakke om en som kan både mye om dette og alle endringene som skjer i de globale verdikjedene. Ernan Sainz, partner in Bain-topp. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Norway. Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you, Marius. Delighted to be back.
Before we get into EVs and all of that, you're what Bain calls the global head of performance improvement. Maybe we should sort of explain to those who are not into consulting lingo what does that mean in practice.
Yeah. What does that mean? Well, essentially, I'm in charge of helping our clients in their operations function. Think of procurement, supply chain, manufacturing, warehousing, anything having to do with the operation of a business. In the past, we used to call it optimizing.
Right.
For the last 3 years, it's transformation. Right. The old value chains of the world do not work. And what we're basically helping companies in all countries, all sectors is transform.
Both in terms of cost management, geographic diversification.
Yes, exactly. I mean, in fact,
climate initiatives. Like
climate initiatives. Yeah, in fact, I would tell you, look, there's 4 vectors. vector number one is resilience. We built this just-in-time supply chains for times when, with stability, we have these shocks, they don't work. And so we're building resilience. Number two, shoring. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But where do you put your manufacturing? It is no longer I can source anywhere, sell anywhere. So where do I put it? Third, ESG, sustainability. Right? Can I decarbonize? Can I make it more circular? Can I reduce waste? And then number four is how much can I put into technology? Can I make it traceable? Here's the problem. More resilience, good. More shoring, good. More sustainability, good. More digital, good. But you can't afford it. So how do you actually pick?
Right.
Where do you actually put your money? And it's different by sector, by company, by country.
And I understand you've been meeting with some Norwegian executives today. I mean, given what you sort of described, we can mention our friends over in Sweden who have famous companies and brands like H&M, IKEA, who obviously deal with a lot of these questions. But when you come to Norway, what sort of companies or what sort of businesses are you talking to who deal with these questions?
Well, I would say everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, you have very large companies in Norway, right? They cover important sectors, oil and gas, of course, chemicals, right? Hydropower, aluminum, and military. And all of these are supply chains, right? They all source inputs, they move the inputs, they convert the inputs, and they take them to a customer. And they're all thinking about, I used to do it in a very tight, inflexible way. It has a lot of carbon in how I did it. I didn't necessarily need to tell you where it came from. It was very...
Nobody cared, yeah.
Nobody cared. It was
as long as you got the product, yeah.
At the end, there was trash. Nobody asked about waste, right? And if you think about it, we're asking all the other questions. Did you build enough flexibility? Yes, no. Where did it come from? Can you show me where it came from? Tell me about the actual carbon footprint. Did you make it circular? And if not, can you go pick it up? Right? And all of these questions are hitting every supply chain in the world. Like I said, I mean, I used to think of optimizing. Let me tweak and make it a little bit better. We are reindustrializing the world.
Yeah. And a company like Apple this week had a big announcement, right, with AI and everything. They used to be able to talk about get the best phone for the lowest price, or at least the lowest cost for them, so they could make a good buck selling it to you. And then they sort of added on, along with other companies, the zero carbon footprint targets that they have. Now we've gotten, after the pandemic, a lot of issues about actually getting the product where it needs to be.
Where it needs to be.
Whole conflict with China is arising. We had the Ukraine full-scale invasion. What are the sort of big topics? Because obviously these executives you meet are well aware of climate traceability and a lot of these things that we've been discussing for quite a few years, right? But what are the key points you're sort of hitting them with now that they need to really think about?
Yeah, the biggest issue has been trying to stay within the same system and respond to a one variable shock. And it doesn't work, right? So all of a sudden, I need resilience. I go and I dual source, I create dual manufacturing, and all of a sudden my costs are crazy. Uh-oh, that doesn't work, right? Or I fix the waste problem, but I create a carbon problem. Again, it didn't work. And so what we're saying is you have to step back. Step back and ask yourself, what does your customer care about? And what is the regulation where your customer is? On the basis of that, imagine the perfect world. Imagine an unconstrained world where you're able to now deliver that product with the right carbon footprint, with the right traceability to that customer. What would it look like? Now, it is not a constrained environment yet. Now put in the constraints. How expensive are they? Right? And how expensive is it to move manufacturing? How expensive is it to dual source? How expensive is it to put a carbon net zero constraint on this? And then make the hard choices. But if you start from today's system, right, just in time, linear, opaque, full of carbon, and you say, I'm going to tweak it, you'll never get there. So we're basically saying, step back, reconstruct it, then build the hard trade-offs. And understand, always customer back, right? I mean, you ultimately want to sell a product that a customer cares about, so you gain market share. That's what most companies are in business to do, and you want to make a profit.
Is the reality Norwegian companies are facing different than what a lot of, say, Swedish companies are facing, just because of the nature of they have more consumer-exposed companies than we do? We have more industrial B2B companies, so while they have let's say H&M, who obviously deal in fashion, they have to answer to the consumer in the store, right? But companies in Norway will usually face professional procurement people in other companies who are buying their aluminium or they're buying their processed products or whatever it might be.
Yeah, first of all, there's no doubt that, number one, the issues everyone is facing, right? Turbulence, it's in every country. The questions of shoring and tariffs, they're in every country. Sustainability is in every country. Digitization is in every country. But you're absolutely right. When you look at a country, you say, well, it's different here than here. For example, right, we have the gift of energy in Norway.
And Texas.
Yeah, and in Texas too. We have the gift of hydropower, right? And so are we going to be out of gas like some of our European colleagues are? No, we're not. Do we depend more on the customer versus the consumer? Yes. Now, there's customers, let's be clear, that are also extraordinarily stringent on sustainability matters.
The German auto industry, who buys a lot of things from Norway. Yeah.
Exactly, right? I mean, you're gonna give me aluminum. I want that aluminum to come in with a very low carbon footprint so that my car has a very low carbon footprint. So on the one hand, you're facing the same four issues and that trade-off. Do I buy more digitization? Do I buy more clean? Do I buy more resilience? Do I buy better shoring? Same questions, but your constraints are different as a Norwegian company, right? And I think you have that gift of energy and hydro that allows you to think about all of those process industries that have massive energy requirements, and you say, well, this is the place to be.
I think our political leaders, at least during the energy crisis in Europe, were some of the most sought-after leaders in the world. We saw these European politicians fly up to Norway to visit and look at oil fields and gas plants.
And we were lucky to have Norway for the rest of the Europe.
We have to talk about EVs given today's news as well. The irony is sort of when you look at the U.S., right, BYD, where do they go to list their company? They went to New York, right, to Wall Street. At the same time, whether you're in Dallas or in Manhattan, you're not seeing very many BYDs on the road. You are seeing them here in Europe, but now you're seeing Europe also sort of moving to, I guess, towards some sort of American stance that we don't want these cars sort of just rolling in over the borders without any barriers or without any speed bumps, so to speak.
Yeah, it's worth.
How do you read the sort of news that have come out today?
Yeah, well, it's good to step back and understand what's been happening, right? In 2020, what was the penetration rate of Chinese EVs in Europe? 1%, maybe? We're 2023, 3 years later, 7%. So one of the things that's happening is we have more Chinese EVs in Europe. Why? Well, if you're in China, right, your domestic market's not doing great. The European market is very good. It is more premium. And by the way, we want EVs in our roads. So of course you would sell here. Is it a competitively advantaged product? Yes, it's cheaper to make it in China. But there's this concern, right, that there are subsidies that are making competition unfair. And that if competition is unfair, our own local industry is disadvantaged and we need to help it. And by the way, it's not just a local industry, it's a green industry. And are we prepared to be disadvantaged? And that's the argument, right? And so and at that point in time, you say, well, we have a tariff of 10%, that's too low, it's got to go to 18 or 20 or something, right? Well, what's going to happen? China's going to respond. It's the natural act, right? And they've actually already threatened the number. They've said 25. Now, as a trained economist, I worry about this. First, I don't like tariffs, right? They just make things more expensive for the end consumer. Second, once you create a tariff war, right, I'm not sure you're creating competitive advantage in any direction. But third, let's think about it. China and Europe are trade surplus countries. We don't want to be in trade wars. It's a terrible idea, right? And so
it's bad for business for both of us, really.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Unlike the U.S., which is in deficit with China.
Exactly, right? Yeah. In which case it's a little bit easier to actually do tariffs.
Yeah. But is Europe moving towards some sort of American approach to this now? Because over the past few months, we've been looking at the U.S. They've implemented restrictions on exports of semis and chips to China. Obviously, a big concern over the whole Taiwan situation, whether China might actually move on Taiwan and the consequences that could have. You've seen the auto industry.
Right.
In defense in Europe, at least in Norway, it seems like people are really focused on this, and we're sort of on the U.S. ship, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean,
in other products, it doesn't seem like Europe has been in the same camp as the U.S. yet.
Thankfully not. I think the news that we got today, right, and that we've been smelling for a couple of weeks, basically do tell us, right, that at least when it comes to EVs, that this was going to happen. Once again, I mean, if I step back and say, can the U.S. do this, and can they underwrite it? Of course, they're a trade deficit country, right? But we're not. And so the question is, are we going to allow a trade war to escalate? Are we going to keep it to one industry? Are we then going to figure out a diplomatic way to reverse it? Because, of course, it's not helping anyone. And to me, that's really important, right? Let's watch it. For now, it is language. Let's see how the escalation works, right? But I look at macroeconomies that can and cannot underwrite tariffs. And hopefully this is a isolated situation. Free trade benefits many of us, right?
What are your reflections on when it comes to sort of the geopolitical and security aspect of this? I mentioned the defense industry. They've been used to this for a long time, having very sort of strict framework they have to operate within. You have to manufacture missile A in country B. You have to have these kind of employees. They can only come from NATO countries and so forth. Is that sort of sieving into other industries now with semis and chips and AI coming to the forefront? Are companies actually having to adapt, or is it still a sort of high-level talking point?
Well, Marius, this is really interesting. If you think about the question of shoring, where do I make stuff? It is first and foremost today a question of resilience. It is also about geopolitics, but it's first and foremost a question of resilience. What we've realized is our very long supply chains are very difficult to recover when we have a shock. And we're going to have shocks. And so if we put manufacturing closer to our customers, when the shock happens, we will recover faster. So a lot of what's happening is not about geopolitics. It's about a world that has massive climatic events. It has pandemics, right? It has ships that actually, eliminate.
Can't go through canals.
Go through a canal, right? You look at the Panama Canal and it's drying up, and you're literally saying, okay, this is a problem. And so for recovery purposes, I got to get closer to my market. So a lot of the right shoring we are seeing is about getting closer. Now, you're absolutely right. There's a secondary effect. And that is, for the last 30 years, I've been working with companies, and we could buy any product or input anywhere and put it anywhere else and then sell it somewhere else. And that is starting to change. There is a fear that the chip shield could break. There is a fear that in certain industries like pharmaceuticals, like food, you need to actually control more of the supply chain because we may be in a world where there's scarcity. And that's an important word. We haven't had scarcity in a long time, right? The wake-up phone call was COVID. But if you think about it, we have the planetary boundaries that we are starting to breach are creating scarcity. And so that's the second thing that's happening, right? So to watch and predict how shoring decisions are made, remember two things. Where is a company's customer base? And number two, is there any geopolitical consideration? And those two is going to give you 80% of the answer for where things are moving. I will tell you, having surveyed across industries, 50% of companies in the world are discussing some part of relocation of manufacturing capacity.
And how about the ability to actually do it? Because when you look at all these Inflation Reduction Act projects, a lot of Norwegian companies are looking or are already heading to the U.S., opening up offices and planning factories and whatnot. Yet at the same time, I hear from a lot of executives that they're concerned about the actual ability of Europe and North America to actually build all these large-scale industrial manufacturing plants, energy projects.
Yes.
Either because capacity's been sort of reduced over the years, we've relied ourselves on Asia.
Yes. I mean, think about it, right?
Can it keep driving up inflation?
Yeah. I mean, let's think about it. If I am an executive opening up a plant, right? What do I need? I need access to energy, at least inexpensive, hopefully green. I need access to labor, skilled labor. I need access to technology. And I probably need an ecosystem. What do I mean, right? Dell doesn't thrive just because it's in Austin. It thrives because a technical and technology ecosystem sits in Austin, along with UT, for example. So that is the question we have to ask. Can the United States, right, provide energy, digitization, a trained labor force, and an ecosystem? My sense, they're going to have to make choices. But you can't do that for everyone. And so, recently I was, for example, meeting with executives in Mexico, who of course are thinking exactly the same question, right? Some of manufacturing will move here, just like some of it will come to Europe. And they are asking themselves, what 5 sectors should we have? So that we can train for those sectors, so we can buy technology for those sectors, so that we can build ecosystems for those sectors. So will some of it move, Marius? Yes. As much as theoretically possible, under no circumstances. We do not have enough skilled labor. We don't have enough labor.
Period, yeah.
Period, and we don't know how to skill it.
Yeah.
Right? We need to solve that problem.
But what's Europe's outlook if we sort of exclude Norway, given our energy position? Because if I talk to like the CEO of Yara, Svein Tore Olsæter, who I'm sure you know runs one of the biggest fertilizer companies in the world, right? He and others are very open about this. They're saying if we're investing in new projects right now, either it might be in Norway.
Yep.
We have access to hydro and we're locally based here, or it's North America because Europe too expensive, energy is too expensive. The U.S. has way too good incentives to develop and create new projects. So it's either sort of Norway than North America, or nothing happens.
Yeah,
and we pay more dividends. That's basically the sort of option sheet they seem, or the matrix they seem to be looking at.
No, it's
how does Europe fare in that world?
It's tricky, right? Because when you do the list of all the places where you can go, right, you start with Vietnam, Indonesia.
I've seen Tim Cook and Elon Musk visit.
Malaysia. You might start seeing India. You look at North America, including Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., right? And of course, we're privileged here in Norway, right? Because we have the energy. But yes, so one advantage we have is we are a market as a Eurozone that is large, and the resilience angle, the ability to quickly recover, to be close to the customer, we still have that. But from a industrial policy perspective, I think we've got to get competitive somehow, right? And what does that require? It requires, once again, trained labor, lower cost of energy, thank you, Norway, right? Investments in digitization, et cetera. And we're going to have to do it with some industrial policy. This is not going to come with simply free market economics, right? Because we'll fall behind.
But if you look at GDP development over, let's say, 10, 15 years, I remember when the EU sort of expanded east and everybody said, oh, we've got 450, 500 million people. We're way past the US. We're going to do much better. But if you look at the GDP development now, much higher in the US, and the growth rate seems to be significantly higher. A lot of the companies are attracting capital, and both in terms of labor and money. What can Europe sort of do? The only thing I sort of saw was, I saw one executive reflect on the fact that Norwegian labor, which used to be kind of pricey and expensive, not so much anymore, because given both the strengthening dollar and the sort of inflation we've seen in labor in the U.S., Norwegian skilled labor is actually quite competitive these days.
It is.
Is that sort of Europe's hope that the U.S. is just too expensive?
Number one, also stability of a policy framework. Right, the U.S. market, right, is somewhat politicized, and as much as companies will tell me I'm very excited about the potential incentives, they also tell me, but are they going to stick? will they be there 2 years from now? And so if the USA doesn't have the skilled labor today, but they're going to work on it, they have a good policy framework. It's somewhat decentralized in how the money flows. But there is a question that companies are asking, is it a stable policy framework? The EU might provide a stable policy framework, which also would make a big difference.
Just before we finish up, when you look at these different countries and how companies work to adapt their supply chains, like I said, we saw Elon Musk and Tim Cook, head of Apple, visit countries like Indonesia, and they've been to India and all these other countries. And I mean, Elon went to China.
Right.
But still, are there other countries we should be sort of watching in terms of countries that could pick up a lot of these home sourcing projects? I know Mexico, obviously, we've seen Audi and BYD in from China are planning factories there. Audi is building a lot of cars there, obviously GM and others. But are there countries in Northern Africa that we should be paying attention to that are picking up a lot of this business from Asia?
That is the question that exactly you need to be asking, right? Because the obvious answers we can all list. We can count them in our hand, right? And it's a set of countries in Southeast Asia, and it's that North American part. And the question is, as we go to this part of the world, we have to ask ourselves where, right? Is it pockets of Europe? Is it Eastern Europe? Is it Northern Africa? Can anyone in the Middle East do what the Emirates have done in the services sector, right? A name we have to think about is, can Saudi Arabia do it, right? They have been talking about building an industrial complex, right, to serve the world. And so we just need to watch, right? I can't predict right now, right? But I can't believe that this part of the world will not play, right? Somebody has to rise to the occasion. But the things we need to manage or understand is policy, labor, digitization, and ecosystems, micro-industrial ecosystems.
Because over there, you've seen German auto companies go to, Porsche makes some of their body panels in Slovakia, right? Engines in Hungary.
Correct.
And I guess European executives, they can't really go to Mexico because they compete with the US executives, right? For
Correct.
The same
Correct.
Facilities and ecosystems, so they have to look somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Arnan Sainz, thank you so much for joining us. Jeg skal bare avslutte egentlig med å si at hovedindeksen på Oslo Børs ligger fortsatt da opp 0,6. Futuresene på Wall Street har gått opp rundt 0,5% faktisk, så det ser ut til å bli en veldig hyggelig dag på Wall Street, i hvert fall aksjemessig, etter da inflasjonstallene som kom inn for mai, godt under det som var ventet både på kjerne- og konsumprisindeksen. Vi ser da også på 10-åringen i USA ned fortsatt da 0,12 prosentpoeng da til 4,29. Vi lå jo da på midt på 4,3-tallet og 4,4 så sent som da i går og i morges, kraftig nedgang der også. Oljeprisen har bikket over $83 fatet med et Europa ellers også som holder seg i grønt. Den virkelig sure dagen i dag, Cavendish, dette spin-off-selskapet fra Nel Hydrogen, ned 23,7% da på dagen de debuterte på børsen. I Finansavisen i morgen så kan du lese Trygve Egnars leder om oljefondets lønnsopprør mot Tesla og Adidas. Det blir intervju med næringsministeren, og du kan lese om comebacket for eiendomsfondet NRP Anaxo, og så blir det også tall fra Rem Offshore og mye mer. Og det var sendingen vår på denne hendelsesrike onsdag 12. juni. Vi håper å se deg igjen når vi da tilbake igjen med Børsmorgen 08:55 i morgen. Da skal vi selvfølgelig fordøye hva Jerome Powell sa da fra podiet i Washington klokken 20:30 i kveld. Husk at beslutningen den kommer klokken 20:00 blank, og den får du selvfølgelig på fa.no. Og så er vi også tilbake igjen med økonominyheten i morgen 14:30. Tusen takk for følget så langt. Vi ses.